The wind howled across the Montana prairie, a mournful wail that carried the scent of sagebrush and dry earth. The late afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows over the endless sea of grass, its golden blades swaying like waves under the weight of an approaching storm. In the distance, thunder rumbled, a deep growl that seemed to rise from the heart of the earth itself. The landscape was vast, untamed, a place where the horizon stretched unbroken to meet the jagged peaks of the Absaroka Range. This was the American West, raw and unyielding, where life clung fiercely to existence. Dr. Lena Whitefeather, a wildlife biologist with the Blackfeet Nation, crouched low behind a cluster of prickly pear cacti, her binoculars pressed to her eyes. Her weathered jacket, dusted with the red clay of the prairie, blended with the terrain. At 38, Lena had spent nearly 2 decades studying the buffalo herds of the Great Plains, her life woven into the rhythms of the land her ancestors had revered. Her dark braid swung gently as she adjusted her focus, her breath steady despite the knot of unease tightening in her chest. Something was wrong. Through the lenses, she spotted him, a massive buffalo bull, standing alone on a low rise, his silhouette stark against the bruised sky. He was enormous, easily 2,000 pounds, his broad shoulders rising 6 feet high, his thick chestnut coat matted with dust and streaked with something darker. Blood. His curved horns gleamed faintly in the fading light, and his massive head hung low, as if bearing an invisible weight. Lena's heart quickened. This wasn't just any buffalo. She recognized the distinctive scar across his left flank, a jagged line from a run-in with a poacher's snare years ago. The locals called him Thunderheart, a name whispered with reverence on the reservation. He was a survivor, a symbol of resilience, the kind of creature that made you believe the old stories of buffalo as sacred guardians. But Thunderheart wasn't moving. He stood rooted to the spot, his hooves planted firmly in the brittle grass, his deep brown eyes fixed on something hidden from view. Lena lowered her binoculars, her brow furrowing. Buffalo didn't stand still like that, not when they were injured, not when a storm was rolling in. Her instincts screamed that something was off. She glanced at her companion, Tom Red Elk, a grizzled rancher who'd volunteered to help her track the herd after reports of a rogue buffalo acting strangely. "You see that?" Lena whispered, her voice barely carrying over the wind. "He's not running. Not even shifting. Just standing there." Tom, his weathered face creased with concern, squinted toward the bull. "Ain't right," he muttered, spitting a wad of chew into the dirt. "Buffalo don't just freeze like that unless they're sick or protecting something. You think he's hurt bad?" Lena didn't answer immediately. She studied Thunderheart again, noting the way his massive chest heaved with labored breaths, the faint tremble in his hind legs. Blood seeped from a gash on his shoulder, staining his woolly coat a dark crimson. Yet his eyes held a spark, something fierce, almost defiant, like a fire that refused to be snuffed out. He wasn't just standing, he was guarding. But guarding what? "We need to get closer," Lena said, slinging her binoculars around her neck and grabbing her field kit. "If he's hurt, we can't leave him out here with that storm coming." Tom hesitated, his hand resting on the rifle slung across his back. "Lena, that's a 2-ton bull. If he's spooked or in pain, he could charge." "You sure about this?" She met his gaze, her dark eyes steady. "I've known Thunderheart since he was a calf. He's not like the others. There's something different about him. I need to know what's going on." Tom sighed but nodded, trusting her instincts. Lena had a reputation on the reservation and beyond, a woman who could read the land and its creatures like a book. Her grandfather, a Blackfeet elder, had taught her to listen to the buffalo, to see them not just as animals but as kin, their spirits tied to the heartbeat of the prairie. She'd spent years advocating for their protection, fighting to restore their numbers after centuries of slaughter. If anyone could approach a wounded buffalo without getting trampled, it was her. They moved cautiously, skirting the edge of a shallow gully to stay downwind. The air grew heavier, thick with the promise of rain, and the grass crunched under Lena's boots, brittle from a dry summer. As they closed the distance, the buffalo's details came into sharper focus. His thick mane, tangled with burrs, his powerful neck, arched as if ready to charge, his eyes, locked on a patch of ground beneath him. Lena's pulse quickened. There was something there, hidden in the tall grass at his feet. Something small, fragile. "Tom, look," she whispered, pointing. "There's something under him." Tom squinted, his hand tightening on his rifle. "Can't see it. Too much grass. Could be a calf, maybe." Lena shook her head. "No. It's smaller. And he's not moving to let us see. He's protecting it." They crept closer, staying low, until they were within 30 yards. Thunderheart's head swung toward them, his nostrils flaring, a low bellow rumbling from his chest like distant thunder. Lena froze, her heart pounding, but she held his gaze. Those eyes, deep, liquid, filled with a strange intelligence, seemed to weigh her, to judge her intent. For a moment, she felt exposed, as if the buffalo saw not just her body but her soul, her purpose. Then, astonishingly, he didn't charge. He didn't flee. Instead, he took a single step back, revealing a glimpse of what lay beneath him. Lena's breath caught. Curled in the grass, barely visible, was a tiny, shivering creature. A newborn tiger cub, its orange and black stripes stark against the pale earth. Its eyes were barely open, its body trembling with weak cries. Around it, the ground was torn, marked with claw prints and tufts of gray fur. Wolf tracks. Lena's mind raced. A tiger cub? Here, in the middle of the Montana prairie? It was impossible, absurd. Tigers didn't belong in this ecosystem. Yet there it was, alive, protected by a buffalo who should have trampled it or fled from the wolves that clearly stalked it. "Great Spirit," Tom whispered, his voice thick with awe. "What in the hell is that doing here?" Lena's mind spun with questions. A circus escape? A smuggled exotic pet? Whatever the answer, the cub was in danger, weak, alone, and far from its natural home. And Thunderheart had chosen to stand over it, to shield it from a pack of wolves, even at the cost of his own blood. She looked at the buffalo again, at the gash on his shoulder, the blood matting his coat. He'd fought for this cub, this stranger to his world. "Why? Tom, we need to call for backup," Lena said, her voice steady despite the shock. "Get the wildlife rescue team out here. And a vet. That cub won't survive long without help, and Thunderheart's hurt bad." Tom nodded, pulling out his satellite phone, but his eyes never left the buffalo. "Never seen anything like this, Lena. A buffalo protecting a tiger? It's like something out of the old stories." Lena didn't respond. She was watching Thunderheart, who had lowered his massive head to nudge the cub gently, his warm breath stirring its fur. The cub mewled, a faint, desperate sound, and Thunderheart answered with a soft grunt, almost tender. Lena's throat tightened. She'd studied buffalo her whole life, knew their strength, their stubborn will to survive. But this was something else. This was compassion, raw and unexplainable, a buffalo risking everything for a creature that wasn't his kin. The wind picked up, carrying the distant howl of wolves. Lena's eyes darted to the horizon, where the storm clouds loomed closer, their edges lit with flashes of lightning. Time was running out. She took a step forward, her hands raised, her voice soft but firm. "Thunderheart," she said, using his name as if he could understand. "I'm here to help. Let me help." The buffalo's ears flicked, his eyes locking onto hers again. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind, the cub's cries, the distant thunder all fading into silence. Then, slowly, Thunderheart shifted, his massive body trembling with effort, and took another step back, giving her a clearer view of the cub. It was a gesture of trust, fragile and fleeting, but enough to make Lena's heart soar. She knelt beside the cub, her hands shaking as she checked its tiny body. It was cold, dehydrated, but alive. Behind her, Tom's voice crackled over the phone, calling in coordinates, urgency in his tone. Lena looked up at Thunderheart, his towering form a sentinel against the darkening sky, and felt a surge of determination. Whatever had brought this cub here, whatever had driven Thunderheart to protect it, she would find out. She would save them both. But as she reached for her kit, A faint sound stopped her, a low, guttural growl from the gully below. Her eyes snapped to the shadows, where yellow eyes glinted in the dusk. The wolves were still out there, watching, waiting. And Thunderheart, bloodied and exhausted, was still standing guard. The Montana prairie seemed to hold its breath as the storm clouds thickened, their edges flickering with veins of lightning. The air was heavy with a metallic tang of rain, and the wind whipped Lena white feathers braid against her cheek as she knelt beside the shivering tiger cub. Its tiny body, no bigger than a house cat, trembled under her careful touch, its orange and black fur damp with dew. The cub's eyes, barely open, glinted with a fragile spark of life, but its weak mules told Lena it wouldn't last long without intervention. Above her, Thunderheart, the massive buffalo bull, stood like a guardian carved from stone, his blood-streaked coat glistening in the fading light. His deep brown eyes flicked between Lena and the shadows of the gully, where the wolves' growls had faded but not vanished. Lena's heart pounded, her mind racing with questions. A tiger cub in the middle of the Great Plains? It was beyond comprehension. Tigers belonged to jungles, to distant continents, not to the wind-swept prairies of Montana. Yet here it was, protected by a buffalo who had fought off wolves to save it. Thunderheart's gash, a jagged tear across his shoulder, oozed blood, matting his thick chestnut fur. His breaths came in heavy, labored huffs, each one stirring the grass around the cub. But he didn't move, didn't flinch, his massive hooves planted firmly as if daring the world to come closer. "Lena, they're on their way," Tom Red Elk called, his voice taut as he pocketed his satellite phone. "Wildlife rescues about 20 minutes out, vet included. Sheriff's sending a deputy, too, in case this is, I don't know, smuggling or something." He crouched beside her, his weathered face creased with disbelief. "A damn tiger cub. You ever hear of anything like this?" Lena shook her head, her fingers gently probing the cub's body for injuries. "Never. Could be an escaped exotic pet, maybe from a private collector. Or a circus passing through. But out here, alone. And with Thunderheart guarding it." She glanced up at the buffalo, whose ears twitched at the sound of her voice. "He fought for this cub, Tom. Look at those tracks. Wolf prints everywhere. He didn't just stumble across it. He chose to stay." Tom's eyes followed the torn earth around them, the claw marks and scattered tufts of gray foretelling a story of violence. "Wolves don't give up easy," he muttered. "He must have taken a hell of a beating to keep him off." Lena nodded, her gaze lingering on Thunderheart's wound. The gash was deep, likely from a wolf's jaws, but his stance was unyielding, his massive head lowered as if ready to charge at any threat. She'd seen buffalo defend their own calves with ferocity, but this was different. This cub wasn't his kin, wasn't even his species. Yet Thunderheart's eyes held a quiet resolve, a depth that made her chest ache. She'd always believed buffalo were intelligent, their herds moving with a collective wisdom that spoke of survival and connection to the land. But this was something more, something almost human. "We need to keep him calm until help gets here," Lena said, her voice steady despite the urgency clawing at her. "And we need to figure out what's going on. This cub didn't just wander out here." She stood slowly, careful not to startle Thunderheart, and scanned the surrounding prairie. The gully nearby dipped into shadow, its rocky edges littered with broken sagebrush and more wolf tracks. Something glinted in the grass, a piece of metal, half buried in the dirt. Lena's pulse quickened. "Tom, cover me," she said, moving toward it. "You sure?" Tom's hand hovered near his rifle, his eyes darting to Thunderheart. "He's watching you like a hawk." "He trusts me," Lena said, though her stomach twisted with doubt. Trust was fragile, especially with a wounded animal weighing 2 tons. She approached the glint, her boots crunching on the dry grass, and knelt to brush away the dirt. It was a small, rusted collar, the kind used for exotic animals, with a broken clasp and a tag inscribed with faded letters, "Property of Zephyr Wildlife." Her breath caught. Zephyr Wildlife was a defunct traveling circus, shut down years ago after accusations of animal cruelty. Could this cub be a remnant of their operation? A smuggled survivor, abandoned in the wilderness? She turned to show Tom, but a low, guttural bellow from Thunderheart stopped her. The buffalo's head swung toward the gully, his nostrils flaring, his massive body tensing. Lena followed his gaze, her heart sinking as she heard it. A faint rustle, followed by another growl, closer now. The wolves were circling back, drawn by the cub's cries or the scent of Thunderheart's blood. "Tom, get ready," Lena whispered, slipping the collar into her pocket. "They're not done yet." Tom raised his rifle, his face grim. "We can't take on a whole pack, Lena. Not just the two of us." "We don't have to," she said, her eyes locked on Thunderheart. "He's still standing. He's not giving up." She took a cautious step toward the buffalo, her hands raised, her voice soft. "Easy, Thunderheart. We're here to help." To her astonishment, the buffalo responded. He let out a soft grunt, almost like a sigh, and shifted his weight, his massive head nudging the cub closer to Lena. The cub mewled, its tiny paws twitching, and Thunderheart's eyes met hers again, steady and unyielding. It was as if he were saying, "Take it. Keep it safe." Lena's throat tightened, a wave of awe washing over her. She'd spent her life studying these animals, but she'd never seen anything like this, a buffalo entrusting a human with something he'd risked his life to protect. She scooped the cub into her arms, its warmth faint against her chest. It was lighter than she'd expected, its ribs sharp under its thin fur. "I've got you," she murmured, tucking it inside her jacket to keep it warm. Thunderheart watched, his breath steaming in the cooling air, his body still poised between her and the gully. Headlights pierced the dusk, the rumble of engines cutting through the wind. The wildlife rescue team had arrived, their truck bouncing over the uneven terrain. Behind them, a sheriff's SUV followed, its lights flashing. Lena felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. The wolves' growls grew louder, more insistent, and Thunderheart let out another bellow, this one sharp and warning. He pawed the ground, his hooves tearing into the earth, sending a spray of dirt into the air. "Lena, move!" Tom shouted, raising his rifle as shadows shifted in the gully. 3 wolves emerged, their eyes glinting, their lips curled back to reveal sharp teeth. They were lean, hungry, and bold, their pack instincts driving them toward the easy prey of a wounded buffalo and a defenseless cub. Lena clutched the cub tighter, backing toward the approaching vehicles. "Don't shoot unless you have to," she called to Tom. "He's protecting us, too." The rescue team spilled out of the truck, Dr. Sarah Klein, a veterinarian with a no-nonsense attitude, and 2 assistants carrying medical kits and a tranquilizer gun. The sheriff's deputy, a young woman named Deputy Maria Cruz, jumped from the SUV, her hand on her holster. "What the hell's going on?" Maria called, her eyes widening at the sight of Thunderheart and the wolves. "No time to explain," Lena said, her voice urgent. "We've got a wounded buffalo and a tiger cub. Wolves are closing in. We need to stabilize Thunderheart and get the cub to safety." Sarah's jaw dropped as she spotted the cub in Lena's arms. "A tiger? Are you serious?" "Dead serious," Lena said, handing the cub to one of the assistants. "It's dehydrated, probably hypothermic. Get it warmed up and hydrated, fast." Sarah nodded, her focus shifting to Thunderheart. "That bull's in bad shape. We need to get closer to treat him, but if he charges—" "He won't," Lena said, though her heart wasn't as certain as her voice. She turned to Thunderheart, who was still facing the wolves, his massive body a barrier between them and the humans. "Thunderheart, we're here. Let us help you." The buffalo's ears flicked, and he let out a low, rumbling sound, almost like a plea. Sarah approached cautiously, her tranquilizer gun ready, but lowered. "He's bleeding heavily," she said, eyeing the gash. "If we don't stop it, he could go into shock." Lena nodded, her mind racing. The collar in her pocket was a clue, but it raised more questions than answers. Who had left this cub here? Why had Thunderheart risked everything to protect it? And why were the wolves so persistent? She glanced at the gully, where the wolves were now pacing, their growls a low chorus. Something about their behavior felt wrong, too coordinated, too desperate. "Maria," Lena called to the deputy. There's a collar in my pocket. Says, Zephyr Wildlife. Can you run it, see if it's tied to anything local? Maria nodded, taking the collar with a gloved hand. Zephyr? That old circus? I'll call it in. Might be smuggling, like Tom said. As Maria stepped away to radio her station, Lena turned back to Thunderheart. The buffalo's eyes were still fixed on the wolves, but he glanced at her, his gaze softening for a moment. It was a fleeting connection, but it hit Lena like a bolt. He was trusting her, not just with the cub, but with his own survival. She swallowed hard, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't let him down. The wolves lunged forward, a sudden burst of movement, and Thunderheart roared, a sound that shook the earth. Lena's heart leapt into her throat as the rescue team scrambled, Sarah raising her tranquilizer gun. But before anyone could act, a new sound cut through the chaos, a faint, human-like cry from the gully, sharp and desperate. Lena froze. It wasn't the cub. It wasn't an animal at all. It was a child. The cry pierced the Montana dusk, a thin, desperate wail that cut through the growl of wolves and the rumble of the approaching storm. Lena Whitefeather's heart lurched, her eyes snapping to the shadowed gully where the sound had come from. The prairie stretched vast and unforgiving around her, its grasses hissing in the wind, the air thick with the scent of rain and blood. Thunderheart, the massive buffalo bull, stood resolute over the patch of ground where he'd guarded the tiger cub, his bloodied shoulder trembling but his stance unyielding. His deep brown eyes flicked toward the gully, his ears twitching as the cry came again, a human child, somewhere in the darkness. Lena's mind raced. A tiger cub was impossible enough, but a child? Here, in this remote corner of the plains, surrounded by wolves and protected by a wounded buffalo? She clutched the cub tighter against her chest, its faint warmth grounding her as she turned to the rescue team. Dr. Sarah Klein, the veterinarian, froze mid-step, her tranquilizer gun still aimed at Thunderheart but her eyes wide with shock. Tom Red Elk, rifle in hand, stared into the gully, his weathered face pale. Deputy Maria Cruz, radio crackling at her hip, muttered a curse under her breath. Lena, did you hear that? Maria asked, her hand hovering over her holster. That's a kid down there. I heard it, Lena said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. She handed the cub to Sarah's assistant, who was already wrapping it in a thermal blanket. Sarah, get the cub stabilized. Tom, Maria, cover me. I'm going to check the gully. You're not going down there alone, Tom protested, his eyes darting to the wolves pacing at the gully's edge. Their yellow eyes glinted in the dusk, their growls low and hungry. Those wolves are too close, and Thunderheart's on edge. One wrong move. I know, Lena cut in, meeting his gaze. But that's a child. We don't have time to wait. She turned to Thunderheart, whose massive head swung toward her, his breath steaming in the cooling air. The gash on his shoulder oozed, staining his chestnut coat, but his eyes held that same spark of intelligence, that same resolve she'd seen when he'd protected the cub. Thunderheart, she said softly, her hands raised. I need to get to that child. Help me. The buffalo let out a low, rumbling grunt, almost like an acknowledgement. To everyone's astonishment, he shifted his weight, his hooves crunching the brittle grass, and took a step toward the gully, positioning himself between Lena and the wolves. His massive body, nearly 2 tons of muscle and bone, was a living wall, his curved horns gleaming faintly in the storm's eerie light. Lena's throat tightened. He was helping her, trusting her, even as his strength waned. Sarah shook her head, her voice urgent. Lena, he's losing too much blood. If we don't treat him soon, he'll collapse. And if those wolves rush us, then we move fast, Lena said, her eyes locked on Thunderheart. She grabbed her flashlight and a rope from her field kit, her pulse hammering in her ears. The cry came again, weaker now, and Lena's stomach twisted. She couldn't hesitate. She moved toward the gully, Thunderheart pacing beside her, his heavy breaths a steady rhythm against the wind's howl. The gully was steep, its rocky walls slick with loose dirt and sagebrush. Lena shone her flashlight down, the beam catching a small figure curled against a boulder. A child, no older than 5, their clothes torn and streaked with mud. Their dark hair was matted, their face pale, and their tiny body shivered as they clutched a tattered backpack. Lena's heart clenched. How had a child ended up here, miles from any road or settlement? "Hold on, sweetheart," Lena called, her voice soft but firm. "I'm coming to get you." The wolves growled louder, their shadows shifting closer. Thunderheart bellowed, a deep, earth-shaking sound that made the air vibrate. The wolves hesitated, their ears flattening, but they didn't retreat. Lena glanced at Thunderheart, his massive form trembling with effort but still defiant. She had to act now. "Maria, Tom, keep those wolves back," Lena said, tying the rope to a sturdy sagebrush root. "Sarah, be ready to treat Thunderheart the second I'm clear." Maria nodded, drawing her sidearm, while Tom aimed his rifle at the nearest wolf. Sarah readied a sedative dart, her face grim. "If he charges, I'll have to trank him, Lena." "I don't want to, but—" "He won't," Lena said, her voice fierce with conviction. She met Thunderheart's gaze, his eyes steady and unyielding. "You're with me, aren't you?" she whispered. The buffalo snorted, his head lowering as if in agreement. Lena descended the gully, the rope biting into her palms as she slid down the rocky slope. The wind whipped her face, carrying the sharp scent of sage and the musky odor of the wolves. Above her, Thunderheart moved to the gully's edge, his hooves sending pebbles skittering down. The wolves lunged forward, snapping and snarling, but Thunderheart roared again, his massive head swinging, forcing them back. Lena's breath caught at his strength, his courage. He was holding the line for her. She reached the child, her flashlight illuminating their small, trembling form. It was a girl, her eyes wide with fear but alive. "Hey, I'm Lena," she said, kneeling beside her. "You're safe now. I'm going to get you out of here." The girl whimpered, clutching her backpack tighter. "My kitty," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They took my kitty." Lena's mind flashed to the tiger cub. Was that what she meant? She didn't have time to ask. She wrapped her jacket around the girl, lifting her carefully. The child was light, her body cold and fragile. "Hold on to me," Lena said, securing the rope around them both. She tugged twice, signaling Tom to pull. As they ascended, the wolves grew bolder, their growls turning to yips as they darted closer. Thunderheart bellowed again, stomping the ground, his massive body swaying with the effort. Lena's heart pounded, fear and awe warring within her. She'd never seen a buffalo act like this, cooperating with humans, protecting not just the cub but now a child, defying his own pain and instincts. Tom and Maria pulled them up, their faces strained with effort. The moment Lena's boots hit solid ground, she handed the girl to Maria, who wrapped her in a blanket and carried her to the SUV. "She's hypothermic," Maria called. "We need to get her to a hospital." Lena nodded, turning back to Thunderheart. The buffalo was swaying now, his breaths ragged, his eyes still fixed on the wolves. Sarah approached cautiously, her medical kit open. "Lena, help me get close. I need to clean that wound and stop the bleeding." Lena moved to Thunderheart's side, her hand hovering near his flank. "Easy, big guy," she murmured. To her astonishment, he didn't flinch. He let out a soft grunt, his head lowering as if giving permission. Sarah worked quickly, cleaning the gash and applying a temporary bandage, her hands steady despite the tension. The wolves paced at a distance, their eyes glinting, but Thunderheart's presence kept them at bay. "He's stable for now," Sarah said, stepping back. "But we need to get him to a sanctuary for proper treatment. He's lost a lot of blood." Lena nodded, her eyes never leaving Thunderheart. The buffalo turned his head, his gaze meeting hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. She saw gratitude in those eyes, a silent understanding that made her chest ache. He'd trusted her, worked with her, to save the child and the cub. It was a partnership she'd never imagined possible. As the rescue team loaded the cub into a heated crate and Maria radioed for an ambulance, Lena knelt beside Thunderheart, her hand resting lightly on his mane. "You did good," she whispered. His warm breath brushed her face, a gentle nudge that felt like an answer. But as the storm broke, rain lashing the prairie, Lena's mind turned to the girl's words. My kitty. The tiger cub, the child, the wolves, it was all connected, a puzzle with pieces still missing. And somewhere in the gully, or beyond, lay the answers to how this impossible scene had come to be. Rain lashed the Montana prairie, turning the dry earth into a slick, red-brown mire. The storm had broken in earnest, its roar mingling with the distant howl of wolves retreating into the night. Lena Whitefeather stood beside Thunderheart, the massive buffalo bull, her hand resting lightly on his bandaged shoulder. His chestnut coat, matted with blood and mud, glistened under the rescue team's floodlights, but his breathing had steadied, his deep brown eyes regaining a flicker of their fierce spark. The tiger cub, now warmed and hydrated, was secure in a heated crate in the wildlife rescue truck, and the child, a girl named Mia, was bundled in blankets in the sheriff's SUV, en route to a hospital with Deputy Maria Cruz. Yet Lena's mind churned with questions, the weight of the night's events pressing against her like the storm itself. The air was thick with the scent of wet sagebrush and ozone, the wind carrying the faint tang of Thunderheart's blood. Lena's boots sank into the mud as she watched Dr. Sarah Klein, the veterinarian, pack up her medical kit. He's stable enough to move, Sarah said, wiping rain from her face. But we need to get him to the sanctuary in Browning. That wound's deep, and he's exhausted. He won't last out here much longer. Lena nodded, her gaze fixed on Thunderheart. The buffalo stood tall despite his injuries, his massive head lowered, his curved horns catching the light. He'd fought wolves, protected a tiger cub, and shielded a human child, defying every instinct of his species. Now, as the rain soaked his woolly mane, he seemed to radiate a quiet resilience, a strength that made Lena's chest ache with awe. She'd spent her life studying buffalo, advocating for their survival, but Thunderheart was rewriting everything she thought she knew. Tom, help me set up the transport pen, Lena called to Tom Red Elk, who was securing the gully with a wildlife assistant. We need to move him carefully. He's trusting us. Tom nodded, his weathered face streaked with mud. Never thought I'd see a buffalo act like that, he said, shaking his head. Standing over a tiger cub, guarding a kid? It's like he's got a soul bigger than most folks I know. Lena didn't respond, but she felt the truth of his words. She approached Thunderheart, her voice soft. We're taking you somewhere safe, big guy. You've done enough for one night. To her surprise, he let out a low grunt, his head tilting toward her as if he understood. His eyes, deep and liquid, held hers for a moment, and she felt that same connection from the gully, a fragile bond, built on trust. The team worked quickly, erecting a temporary enclosure around Thunderheart, using portable fencing to guide him toward the transport trailer. He moved slowly, his hooves sinking into the mud, but he didn't resist. Lena walked beside him, her hand hovering near his flank, ready to calm him if he panicked. But Thunderheart remained steady, his breaths heavy but even, as if he knew this was the next step in his survival. As they loaded him into the trailer, Sarah took blood samples and scanned him for a microchip. This guy's got a rare genetic marker, she said, checking her tablet. He's part of the purebred Plains buffalo lineage, less than 1,000 left. If we can save him, he could be key to herd restoration. Lena's heart lifted at the news, but her mind was elsewhere. The collar she'd found, marked Zephyr Wildlife, and Mia's whispered words, "My kitty," gnawed at her. She turned to the gully, now illuminated by the team's lights, and spotted something new. Tire tracks, partially washed away by the rain but unmistakable. They led away from the gully, toward a faint trail in the distance. Someone had been here, and recently. Sarah, keep an eye on Thunderheart, Lena said, grabbing her flashlight. I'm checking those tracks. Don't go alone, Sarah warned, but Lena was already moving, her boots splashing through the mud. She followed the tracks, her beam cutting through the rain, until she reached a cluster of sagebrush. There, half buried in the wet earth, was a crumpled note, its ink smudged but legible. She knelt, shielding it from the rain, and read, "Take her to safety. I can't. Please." No signature, no names, just a plea scrawled in haste. Lena's stomach twisted. The note, the cub, the child, It all pointed to a desperate act. She slipped the note into her pocket and returned to the team, her mind racing. At the trailer, Thunderheart was secured, his massive form filling the space, his eyes watching her through the slats. She climbed into the truck with Sarah, who was monitoring the cub. "The cub's stable but weak," Sarah said, adjusting in 4-drip. "It's maybe 2 weeks old, malnourished. Someone abandoned it out here, no question." "And the child," Lena added, her voice low. "Mia. She said something about her kitty. I think she meant the cub. And this note." She showed it to Sarah, whose eyes widened. "Sounds like someone was running from something," Sarah said. "Maybe smugglers. Zephyr Wildlife shut down years ago, but their animals got scattered, sold off, abandoned. This cub could be one of theirs." Lena nodded, her thoughts aligning. "And Mia. She couldn't have wandered out here alone. Someone left her, left them both, and Thunderheart stepped in." As the truck rumbled toward the Blackfeet Wildlife Sanctuary in Browning, Lena's phone buzzed. It was Maria, calling from the hospital. "Lena, Mia's awake," Maria said, her voice tense. "She's talking, but it's patchy. Says her mom told her to hide with her kitty when bad people came. She doesn't know where her mom is now." Lena's grip tightened on the phone. Bad people. Did she say anything else? "Not much," Maria replied. "She's scared, dehydrated, but stable. The doctors are with her. I'm digging into Zephyr Wildlife. Turns out they had ties to some shady dealers. Might be a smuggling ring. I'll keep you posted." "Thanks, Maria," Lena said, hanging up. She leaned back, the weight of the night settling over her. A smuggling ring could explain the cub, maybe even Mia's presence, but it didn't explain Thunderheart. Why had he protected them? What had driven a buffalo to risk his life for creatures so foreign to his world? At the sanctuary, a sprawling facility on the edge of the reservation, the team unloaded Thunderheart into a large, heated enclosure. He stepped out slowly, his hooves thudding against the straw-covered floor, his coat already looking less matted under the care of Sarah's team. Lena watched as he sniffed the air, his head turning toward her. He let out a soft bellow, deep and resonant, and nudged the gate with his nose, as if acknowledging her presence. "He's going to make it," Sarah said, joining her. "That wound's clean now, and he's responding to antibiotics. But he'll need time. And this cub." She gestured to the crate, where the tiger was curled under a heat lamp. "It's a miracle it survived." If Thunderheart hadn't stood his ground. Lena nodded, her throat tight. She stepped closer to Thunderheart's enclosure, her hand resting on the gate. "You're a fighter," she whispered. He met her gaze, his eyes steady, and for a moment, she felt that bond again, a connection that transcended species, rooted in something deeper, something sacred. As dawn broke, painting the prairie in hues of gold and pink, word of Thunderheart's story began to spread. A local reporter, tipped off by Maria, arrived at the sanctuary, her camera flashing as she interviewed Sarah and the team. "A buffalo saving a tiger cub and a child," she said, scribbling notes. "This is going to blow up. People need to hear this." Lena stayed quiet, her focus on Thunderheart. The reporter's words echoed her grandfather's stories, of buffalo as guardians, their spirits tied to the land and its people. But this story was bigger than legend. It was real, and it was changing things. Researchers from the University of Montana were already calling, eager to study Thunderheart's behavior, his rare genetics. Conservation groups were reaching out, proposing a new initiative to protect the plains buffalo. Yet as Lena watched Thunderheart settle into his enclosure, his massive form calm but majestic, she knew the story wasn't over. The note, Mia's words, the tire tracks, they pointed to a larger truth, one that might lead back to the bad people Maria was chasing. Lena's resolve hardened. She'd saved Thunderheart and the cub, helped Mia, but now she had to find out why this had happened, and how to ensure it never happened again. The Blackfeet Wildlife Sanctuary buzzed with activity as the Montana sun climbed high, casting golden light across the rolling prairie. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and scented with wet grass and sagebrush. Inside a spacious enclosure, Thunderheart, the massive buffalo bull, stood tall, his chestnut coat gleaming with renewed luster. The gash on his shoulder was healing, the stitches hidden beneath his thick fur, and his deep brown eyes held a quiet strength that seemed to anchor the entire sanctuary. Lena Whitefeather watched him from the fence, her heart swelling with pride. He was more than a survivor, he was a symbol, a living testament to resilience and compassion. 2 weeks had passed since that rain-soaked night in the gully, when Thunderheart had protected a tiger cub and a child named Mia from a pack of wolves. The cub, now named Ember for the fiery streaks in her fur, was thriving in a specialized enclosure, her tiny paws stronger with each passing day. Mia, recovering in a Great Falls hospital, had begun to share fragments of her story, guided by a gentle social worker. The pieces were coming together, but the puzzle was far from complete. Lena's mind churned with the mystery, the crumpled note, the Zephyr wildlife collar, the tire tracks leading into the wilderness. Yet her focus now was on Thunderheart's future and the unexpected legacy he was forging. Lena leaned against the fence, her weathered jacket dusted with prairie dirt. She'd spent every day at the sanctuary since the rescue, monitoring Thunderheart's recovery and advocating for his protection. His enclosure, a wide expanse of grass dotted with cottonwood trees, was temporary, but Lena had bigger plans. She'd been in talks with the Blackfeet Tribal Council and the Montana Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks to establish a permanent preserve for Thunderheart and his kin, a place where the purebred plains buffalo could roam freely, their numbers growing under careful stewardship. "Looking good, isn't he?" Sarah Klein's voice broke Lena's thoughts. The veterinarian approached, her clipboard tucked under her arm. "His bloodwork's clean, and the wounds healing faster than I expected. He's a fighter." Lena nodded, her eyes never leaving Thunderheart. He was grazing now, his massive head lowered to the grass, but his ears flicked toward her, as if he sensed her presence. "He's more than that," she said softly. "He's changing how people see buffalo. Did you see the researchers today?" Sarah grinned. "Yeah, the university folks are losing their minds. They're calling Thunderheart's behavior unprecedented. Protective instincts across species? They're talking about a whole study on buffalo cognition, maybe even emotional intelligence." Lena's chest tightened with hope. She'd always believed buffalo were more than the lumbering giants outsiders saw, her grandfather's stories had taught her that. But Thunderheart's actions had caught the world's attention. News outlets had picked up the story, dubbing him the Guardian of the Plains. Social media buzzed with hashtags, #Thunderheart, #BuffaloHero, spreading his tale far beyond Montana. Conservation groups were pledging funds, and the Blackfeet Nation was rallying to make the preserve a reality, tying it to their cultural heritage. But the road wasn't easy. Lena had spent hours in meetings, facing skeptical bureaucrats who questioned the cost of a new preserve. "Why focus on one buffalo?" a state official had asked, his tone dismissive. Lena's response had been fierce. "Because this one buffalo is waking people up. He's showing us what we've forgotten, how to care, how to protect what matters." As she watched Thunderheart now, a memory surfaced, the moment in the gully when he'd trusted her, stepping aside to let her save Mia and Ember. That trust had changed her. Lena had always been driven, her life dedicated to the buffalo and the land, but she'd carried a quiet loneliness, a sense of being caught between her scientific work and her cultural roots. Thunderheart had bridged that gap, reminding her why she fought so hard. He'd given her purpose, a fire she hadn't known she'd lost. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back. It was Deputy Maria Cruz, her voice urgent. "Lena, we got a break. The Zephyr wildlife collar led us to a defunct ranch outside Billings. Found records of illegal animal trading, tigers, lions, even bears. Mia's mom was involved, but it looks like she was trying to get out. She left Mia and the cub in the prairie to keep them safe from the smugglers." Lena's grip tightened on the phone. "Where's her mom now?" "Still missing," Maria said. "But we're closing in. Mia's talking more. She says her mom worked for the circus, then got caught up with some bad people." "That note you found?" "It was hers. She hid Mia and the cub, hoping someone would find them." Lena's eyes drifted to Thunderheart, grazing peacefully. "Someone did," she murmured. What about Mia? She's staying with a foster family for now, but she's asking about her kitty. Wants to see the cub. And she mentioned the buffalo. Says he kept her warm, stood over her when the wolves came. Lena's throat tightened. She could picture it, Thunderheart's massive form shielding Mia's tiny body, his warmth a bulwark against the cold and the predators. Can we arrange a visit? She asked. For Mia to see Ember and Thunderheart? I'll make it happen, Maria said. This story's bigger than us now, Lena. It's changing things. She was right. The sanctuary was abuzz with visitors, tribal elders, conservationists, even a documentary crew. Thunderheart's story had sparked a movement, with calls for stricter laws against exotic animal trafficking and renewed efforts to protect the plains buffalo. Lena had been invited to speak at a national conservation conference, her voice amplifying Thunderheart's legacy. But for her, it was personal. Every time she looked into his eyes, she saw a partner, a teacher, a creature who'd shown her the power of compassion. That afternoon, Lena led a small group to Thunderheart's enclosure, tribal elder Joseph Black Elk, Sarah, and a biologist from the university. Joseph, his face lined with decades of wisdom, rested his hands on the fence, his eyes tracing Thunderheart's form. This one carries the old spirit, he said, his voice low. Our people have always known the buffalo are more than animals. They are our brothers, our protectors. He reminds us what we've lost, and what we can save. Lena nodded, her heart full. She stepped closer to the fence, calling softly, Thunderheart. The buffalo lifted his head, his ears twitching, and ambled toward her. The group fell silent as he stopped a few feet away, his massive head lowering until his warm breath brushed her outstretched hand. It was a gentle nudge, a moment of connection that felt sacred. Lena's eyes stung with unshed tears. Thank you, she whispered. Later, as the sun dipped low, painting the prairie in hues of amber and rose, Lena stood alone by the enclosure. Thunderheart grazed in the distance, his silhouette a dark monument against the sky. The preserve was moving forward, the tribal council had secured land, and funding was pouring in. Thunderheart would soon roam free again, leading a herd of his own kind, his legacy secured. But Lena's work wasn't done. Mia's mother was still out there, and the smugglers needed to be stopped. Lena had promised herself she'd see this through, for Mia, for Ember, for Thunderheart. She'd changed too. No longer just a scientist or a daughter of the Blackfeet, but a bridge between worlds, human and animal, science and spirit. As Thunderheart let out a deep, resonant bellow, echoing across the prairie, Lena felt a surge of hope. This was only the beginning. The Montana prairie stretched boundless under a late summer sky, its golden grasses swaying in a gentle breeze that carried the faint scent of sagebrush and earth. The sun hung low, painting the horizon in hues of crimson and violet, its light catching the dust kicked up by a small herd of buffalo grazing in the newly established Blackfeet Buffalo Preserve. At their center stood Thunderheart, his massive form a beacon of strength, his chestnut coat gleaming with health. His curved horns glinted as he raised his head, letting out a deep, resonant bellow that echoed across the plains, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. Lena Whitefeather stood at the preserve's edge, her weathered boots planted in the soil, her heart full as she watched him. This was his home now, a place where he could roam free, a testament to his courage and the bond they'd forged. 6 months had passed since that stormy night when Lena had found Thunderheart guarding a tiger cub and a child named Mia from a pack of wolves. The Blackfeet Buffalo Preserve, born from his story, sprawled across thousands of acres, a sanctuary for the purebred plains buffalo and a symbol of renewal for the Blackfeet Nation. Thunderheart, fully recovered, led a small herd, his presence drawing visitors from across the country. Scientists, conservationists, and families eager to see the buffalo who defied nature's rules to protect the helpless. His scar, now a faint line beneath his thick fur, was a badge of his sacrifice, a story etched into his very being. Lena leaned against a wooden fence, her braids swaying as she adjusted her jacket. The preserve's opening ceremony had just ended, a vibrant gathering of tribal elders, local leaders, and media. A plaque stood near the entrance, inscribed with Thunderheart's name and a Blackfeet prayer for the land's healing. Lena's advocacy had made this possible, her voice carrying his story to conference halls and council meetings, sparking a national movement to protect the buffalo and combat exotic animal trafficking. The Zephyr wildlife smuggling ring had been dismantled, thanks to Deputy Maria Cruz's relentless investigation. Mia's mother, found hiding in a safe house, had been reunited with her daughter, both now safe and rebuilding their lives. The tiger cub, Ember, had been relocated to a reputable sanctuary in Colorado, where she thrived under expert care. Mia visited her often, her small face lighting up at the sight of her kitty, and she'd even come to see Thunderheart, touching his flank with a shy reverence that brought tears to Lena's eyes. Now, as the crowd dispersed and the prairie settled into quiet, Lena walked toward Thunderheart's herd. The grass crunched under her boots, the air warm with the fading heat of the day. Thunderheart spotted her, his ears twitching, and ambled toward the fence, his massive shoulders rolling with each step. He stopped a few feet away, his deep brown eyes meeting hers, and let out a soft grunt, almost like a greeting. Lena smiled, her hand resting on the fence. "You did this, you know," she murmured. "You brought us all together." She thought back to the gully, to the moment Thunderheart had trusted her to save Mia and Ember. That night had changed her, rekindling a fire she hadn't known was dimming. As a wildlife biologist, she'd spent years fighting for the buffalo, her work driven by science and duty. But Thunderheart had taught her something deeper, about compassion, about connections that transcended species and logic. Her Blackfeet heritage, rooted in the stories of her grandfather, had always spoken of the buffalo as kin, their spirits tied to the land. Thunderheart had made that truth real, not just for her but for the world. The preserve was more than a sanctuary, it was a turning point. Researchers from the University of Montana had launched a study on buffalo cognition, inspired by Thunderheart's protective behavior. Their findings, published in a major journal, were reshaping how scientists viewed animal intelligence, with Thunderheart as the centerpiece. Conservation policies were shifting, too. New protections for the plains buffalo were in place, and the Blackfeet Nation was leading a coalition to restore herds across the Great Plains. Thunderheart's rare genetic lineage, confirmed by Sarah Klein's tests, made him a cornerstone of those efforts, his offspring carrying the hope of a species reborn. But for Lena, the true legacy was personal. She'd found her voice, not just as a scientist but as a daughter of the Blackfeet, a bridge between worlds. She'd overcome her own doubts, her quiet loneliness, through the bond she'd formed with Thunderheart. Every time she spoke at a conference or met with tribal elders, she carried his story, his strength, within her. And every time she visited the preserve, she felt him return that trust, his presence a reminder of what was possible when compassion guided action. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting Thunderheart's silhouette in sharp relief, Lena heard footsteps behind her. Joseph Black Elk, the tribal elder, joined her, his weathered hands resting on the fence. "He's home," Joseph said, his voice warm with pride. "And so are you." Lena nodded, her throat tight. "He showed me what matters," she said. "Not just the buffalo, but the land, the people, the connections we've forgotten." Joseph's eyes crinkled with a smile. "That's the old way, Lena. The buffalo have always taught us, if we listen." They stood in silence, watching Thunderheart rejoin his herd, his bellow echoing as the other buffalo answered, their voices a chorus across the prairie. Lena thought of Mia, now laughing with her mother, of Ember growing strong in her new home, of the countless people touched by Thunderheart's story. It was a ripple effect, one act of compassion sparking change far beyond the plains. She turned to the horizon, where the stars were beginning to emerge, and spoke softly, as if to the readers of her story, "To you. Thunderheart showed us what's possible when we see beyond ourselves. He risked everything for a cub and a child, creatures he had no reason to protect. What could you do with that kind of courage? Have you ever felt a connection to an animal, a moment that changed how you see the world? The buffalo are still out there, their herds shrinking, their land under threat. You can help, support conservation, share their story, listen to the land. One act of compassion can change everything, just like Thunderheart did." Lena touched the fence one last time, her fingers brushing the wood as if it were Thunderheart's flank. She turned away, her boots steady on the earth, her heart alight with purpose. Thunderheart's bellow followed her, a call to action, a promise of hope. The prairie stretched on, vast and eternal, and in its heart, a buffalo stood as its guardian, his legacy a beacon for all who dared to care.